Okay, well, it's 9:02, so I want to be conscious of all of our time. Again, appreciate everybody here today. Welcome to this wonderful webinar, Algorithms for Good. What does this even mean? Unlocking social transformation with AI. Very happy to join you today. My name is Monique Fry. I am from the Chiem First Nation, which is a part of the Salo Tribal Council in British Columbia. I live just outside of Calgary, enough to be away from the city, but not quite in the mountains, so sort of in between. And I'm the VP of Community Success here, and I'm joined as your host with Kirill.
Hey everyone, I'm Carol Mendoza. I'm joining you from Treaty 7, and I am also the director of product here at HelpSeeker, and I'm here to bring in a different perspective than Mo and make sure that we are all united in what we think is actually how do we do social transformation using AI? How do we use AI for good? So back to you, Mo.
Great, thank you. To kick us off, I also just want to acknowledge the traditional territories in which we are on. HelpSeeker, we are very fortunate in this time of technology to have our staff located all across Turtle Island, which is now known as Canada. So some of us are on the west side of the country, some of us on the east side, and then some in between. But we do want to take this time to not only acknowledge where HelpSeeker was born and raised in the Treaty 7 territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, but it's also important for us to acknowledge that, you know, the ways in which colonial actors and institutions have perpetually denied Indigenous people their rights to self-determination and sovereignty. And we really think at the core of the work that we do that this should be challenged. And this work in particular, when we look at anything to do with data, technology, AI, machine learning, to some people like me, maybe don't know that much about it. And what does this mean to us individually? What does it mean to us as communities? What does it mean to our organizations and our business? And as an Indigenous person, as a First Nations woman, one of the things that I fear is that this is another step that perhaps Indigenous communities will fall behind on, that we will get lost in that gap of knowledge, in particular about AI, about technology and machine learning. And we know that we have the fastest growing population within Canada, with more and more Indigenous people going to university, going to college. And I really want to see Indigenous people take up the helm of learning more about technology and what spaces are there for us within that. But also, what does it mean when we're working with Indigenous communities in particular and First Nations, and understanding of OCAP, the OCAP principles, which we presented at a webinar before. But we know that Indigenous people sometimes are left out of data sets altogether, or that there's bias in the way in which algorithms and technology and data is built to exclude or be detrimental to Indigenous communities. So I know that was supposed to be a land acknowledgement to acknowledge where we're from, but I think it was a good segue into sort of why I'm here, why I'm interested to understand a little bit more about this, and know that there's a lot that we need to talk about in terms of data equity and ethics and bias and all these things that go hand in hand with AI and machine learning, I think. So yes, welcome everybody. So who are we? Hopefully, if you're on this call today, you've been following us a lot. We do these webinars every month. It's part of our thought leadership to share the things that we are doing, how we're growing, how we're changing, how we're learning. And sometimes we are sharing with you in the exact same time that we're learning it. We are a social tech B Corp, which means that we are more than just a for-profit company. We care about more than just the money bottom line. We care about the environment. We care about sustainability. We care about social justice and some of these things that perhaps don't always go hand in hand with a technology company, and that we think makes us a little bit different than others, both those that work within the social sector and within the tech sector. It's really finding that marriage between the two. We grow and we grow and we grow. I've been here for just over a year at HelpSeeker, and when I started, there was 28 of us, and now there are 60. And continue to grow. Again, just very wonderful work that we do, I think, and really we look for solutions for these complex social issues, and AI and machine learning and the technology pieces that Matt and Kirill's team work alongside my community success team to deliver to communities and municipalities across the country is a huge part of that. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention some of our national partners, CMHC and Canada's Digital Technology Supercluster. They've really had a lot of faith and trust in this small but growing startup scale-up company. So welcome everybody. It's a little bit about us. So very quickly, our agenda, don't have to go through all the details, but this is the flow of things today. So we'll welcome the host, we'll introduce them. They will get 5 minutes to present on their perspective and why they're here, why we invited them. We wanted to invite a diverse group of experts in this field, both from a theoretical standpoint, but also from a practical, like what are we doing? What's out there in the world right now? How are we learning? How are we growing? And how are we continuing to do this work in a good way? And so they will have 5 minutes to present, and then we will have Q&A panel style for everybody. So we're going to kick it off first with Yasmin Manajad, which I already butchered, I'm sure. My apologies. She is a PhD in software engineering and an assistant professor at Mount Royal University. We're very excited to have you here, and I will turn the stage over to you.
Thanks, Manik, for the introduction. So my name is Yasemin, and as Mike mentioned, my background is in software engineering, and the research I do is in the intersection of software engineering and building data-intensive applications, and I guess that's why I'm here. And I'm going to start this discussion by a little bit talking about what's happening around technology and AI. And technology, as you all know, is affecting our everyday lives and has shown a great amount of progress in the recent years, especially in the area of AI, using technology and algorithms to mimic some of the human intelligence. AI is already integrated in some aspects of our lives and is also being used by many industries. But the adoption of AI is slower in some industries than others. And I guess one of the barriers in adopting AI is the trust in AI. Trusting AI systems is cited as the biggest barrier for enterprises. And the lack of trust and the fear of AI in some cases is understandable. When, as researchers, we design and develop AI systems in computer labs, normally it's designed with a good intention and with a useful and for a happy use case. But the same technology might be misused, and an algorithm that is, for example, designed to track patients to monitor their recovery might be misused to invade people's privacy. And as tech and AI is growing and becoming more powerful, so does the fear that comes with it. And the question that comes often is that, what should we do? Should we abandon AI? Should we abandon technology? And looking at the history, history may convince us that avoiding a technology is just for the sake of possible or potential harms that may come with it might not be a reasonable solution. We use cars every day, and it might be hard to imagine our lives without using them. And cars can cause accident, can be used for hit and run. But we as a society we have come together and put rules to mitigate the potential harms for the sake of benefiting from what we can get from those technologies. And we can see similar patterns in the adoption of our technologies, that we need to put rules and regulations in order to use them safely. And abandoning a technology that is already part of our lives and is growing every day probably is not going to help us, help our company or our society. We need to come together, raise those concerns, and find solutions to direct the already growing technology in the direction that matches with the expectations and the values of our society to use technology responsibly. And today, we hear various terminologies such as ethical AI, responsible AI, responsible technology, human-centric AI, the use of algorithms, the use of data for good. And all these terms in my mind are in fact our joint efforts in using technology and AI responsibly. Kirill, can we go to the next slide? Using AI responsibly, well, it has different aspects to it to use AI systems in design AI systems that are reliable, they're transparent, and are inclusive. And also, they're fair in their decisions. AI systems or any technological system that is trained by the data coming from our society might have the similar biases as what we as humans have in our decision making. But because of the range of the effect that technology can have, or the scalability aspect of it, it's important to capture those biases, make sure that the decisions are made in a fair way. And also, we need systems that are designed in secure manner and also respect our privacy. And that's also one of the areas that I'm very interested in, the use of privacy preserving machine learning techniques, that we use the benefit of AI, but at the same time, we preserve the privacy of the data of users or the companies that are sharing their data with us. I'm going to stop here and pass it back to you, Monik.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I know 5 minutes is super quick, but we do have lots of really great questions that we curated from staff here at HelpSeeker that they had to ask for the panelists. So everyone gets 5 minutes. So we're trying to stick to it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You'll hear more from her. I promise. And next we had Matt Parker, and he is our EVP of Innovation here at HelpSeeker. And so he is the mastermind behind everything that we do. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Mo, and great start, Yasmin. So I thought I'd take a moment to kind of wax philosophical here, so forgive me. It's interesting because I've worked with deploying AI in different verticals, so things like insurance, healthcare, and now the social sector. And there often isn't a discussion on the core of judgment and what algorithms and technology can really do to help. And so if we look at our own judgment as humans, it actually can be quite flawed. And there's a ton of research out there. I'm reading a great book right now called Noise, which talks about noise and bias in judgment. And we see it time and time again, even though we don't realize it. Some good examples I've read about recently is even in the justice system. They did a big review of the US justice system and found huge amounts of variability for sentencing. In insurance, there's one study I read where underwriters were 50% variable depending on what their best guess was on the decision. And when people are confronted with these stats, they're often really shocked on how variable, how inconsistent, and how incorrect we as humans can actually get these levels of professional merit, like a judge, like a doctor, like a lawyer, and people like that. And so it's interesting where all I'm asked when I come in to talk about AI is, what if AI gets it wrong, or what if technology gets it wrong? We get it wrong as humans every day, time and time again. And so it's not about replacing humans, it's about providing more structure, providing more information, providing more accuracy. And with that, what's most interesting is about how much it can help us and not replace us in these day-to-day decisions. Because the other thing we can't do as humans is look at too many different points of data to make a decision. And there's tons of great research out there, even how much the weather can affect your decision on a daily basis. So if it goes up by 2 degrees, you can look at decisions made, recurring decisions made, and they change a lot. And so we as humans have to be careful about just trusting that we are going to be better than technology. But on the flip side, I think one of the failures of technology and the release of it is explaining it. And so technology is by no means perfect, as we also are not perfect. And so it's not about the technology being this, black box that's amazing, that'll do everything, but really trying to understand what the status quo is in the current decision-making or judgment, and how technology might aid that or change that. And really making sure that the users understand what that means for them. And we see this in the social sector too. We ran into an example recently where for a homeless shelter, even if the person met all the criteria, it really came down to the judgment of an individual who was working that day. And so really what technology can do is really, even if we don't use the technology, we can use this as an opportunity to study our decision-making and figure out how we can best serve and help others. And so kind of just to summarize here, one side is technology is by no means perfect, but we need to look at how imperfect we are today and what we do. But on the flip side, technology isn't just a silver bullet. We need to understand and really disseminate that knowledge. But I'm sure you'll hear me talk more today, but I'll pass it back to Mo for now.
Thanks, Matt. I know for me, being someone who doesn't know a lot about this kind of, AI, machine learning and things, the only context I have is like, Skynet and Terminator, which is probably not the best reference for us as we think about these things. So I'm super excited to hear what others have to say. All right, welcome to our next speaker, Josephine Yam, who is very interesting for me in terms of I've one day thought about being a lawyer, but just never did. And so she brings a very interesting perspective, I think, in terms of AI ethics and the legal parameters. So welcome, Josephine.
Thank you, Monique, and it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here in your Algorithms for Good webinar. And I love that Matt set it up so beautifully in terms of waxing philosophical about AI, because I'm an AI lawyer, I'm an AI ethicist, and a tech entrepreneur. And I just actually finished my master's degree in philosophy, specializing in AI ethics 3 months ago at the University of Guelph. So we can see here that not everything legal is ethical, and not everything ethical is legal in the AI world. So just a little about Skills for Good AI. So we are a privacy and AI audit SaaS company. We provide organizations with privacy and AI audits to ensure that they're deploying responsible AI by conducting privacy impact assessments and algorithmic impact assessments for them, whether they're in the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, or the government sector. We also provide an introduction to responsible AI because companies and nonprofits and the government want to upskill their employees with ethical AI literacy skills. So it's really very interesting that last year, Google CEO Sundar Pichai declared, AI is one of the most profound things we're working on as humanity. It's more profound than fire. So he recommended that we develop a global accountability framework to ensure that we deploy responsible AI. So one of the most crucial legal and ethical aspects that humanity is grappling with right now is AI accountability. From autonomous cars to autonomous weapons to the care robots that we saw during the pandemic that were helping frontline medical workers reduce their exposure to the virus, we are seeing AI working in all aspects of our life. But the biggest question is, who or what is responsible if these AI systems cause harm to humans? Of course, there are a lot of promises of AI. And in fact, for example, with the care robots that we saw that were helping frontline workers handle the pandemic, robots, they don't get tired and they don't get sick. But for all the promises of AI that will make life better for humans, AI can actually be dangerous. Next slide, please. Let's take the case of Professor Latanya Sweeney. She's the first Black woman who received a PhD in computer science from MIT. One day, out of curiosity, she Googled her name to check what search results would appear. She was shocked to discover that online ads offering criminal record checks appeared beside the search results that read, Latanya Sweeney, arrested. Number 1, enter name and state. Number 2, access full background, checks instantly. Research shows that when conducting online searches of names that are racially associated with the Black community, it was 25% more likely that ads would appear suggesting that that person had a criminal record. But in searches of names of non-Black communities, no such criminal records showed up. This is an example of when AI can be dangerous. This is algorithmic bias, where AI algorithms are clearly racist. And in many cases, we are going to see that AI can be not only racist, it can also be sexist, whether it's in HR recruitment, in diagnosing for mental illness, in all aspects of our life, algorithmic bias is a danger that needs to be made accountable for, and somebody has to be responsible for it. Next slide, please. And because of this, as Harvard Business Review noted, new AI regulations are coming. Is your organization ready? Over the past years, governments around the world, more than 100, have rapidly developed AI regulations and new privacy regulations that establish AI accountability. These regulations are holding corporations, nonprofits, and governments accountable for the negative impacts of their AI systems. And what's really interesting is with the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, with the US Algorithmic Accountability Act, and even with Canada's Consumer Privacy Protection Act that's coming, they are using a privacy and human rights by design approach, meaning that international human rights law will be used as the universal standard for determining algorithmic accountability. Now, many companies and organizations are saying, okay, we need to conduct impact assessments to make sure that our AI is deployed responsibly, but our employees don't know anything about AI. They're afraid of AI and afraid of AI ethics. Well, here's what the Harvard Business Review recommends. Next slide, please. To deploy responsible AI, Harvard Business Review recommends that everyone in your organization needs to understand AI ethics. Note that it says everyone, not just your IT division, not your procurement folks, or not just your in-house lawyers. It says everyone, meaning all your employees need to develop AI ethics literacy skills, and this should be a top priority because it will help employees make the right decisions when they're using AI and your tech systems in deploying AI, whether it's in recruitment, marketing communications, in operations, in procurement, in customer support. At the end of the day, all organizations using data and technology need to use algorithms for good. Because as Stanford Professor Fei-Fei Li notes, we can create a human-centered AI world that will enhance our humanity, not diminish it or replace it. On that note, if you want to chat further, feel free to reach out to me through email or through LinkedIn, and happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I really appreciate the angle of bringing the humanity part into it and thinking about those human rights from that context. Thank you so much. And now our last panelists with their 5 minutes. I feel like we're on a debate here. Like you get your spots, that's all you get. We're going to cut you off and then get to the more juicy bits. Please welcome James Offridge from Blue Dot.
Thank you so much. Very grateful and humbled to be a part of the panel here. And I felt that my perspective as someone who works in an applied environment, works with AI on a daily basis, I could paint a bit of a picture of how we combine AI and human intelligence at Blue Dot. Fundamentally, what Blue Dot is designed to do is to help organizations across the world assess, detect, and respond to infectious disease outbreaks. We work with governments of all types, organizations in the private sector, and things to effectively help our clients react appropriately to the various infectious disease threats across the world. And so functionally how we do that is through an ongoing pairing of an AI-driven process that scans global news media worldwide with a trained set of surveillance analysts. These are clinicians, epidemiologists, who then review that data and provide that sort of combined human and AI judgment about whether or not a disease threat is salient or not. And to give you an example, if you could slide over to the next slide, please. So this team's role, very much, we describe it as they leverage AI to augment the human capacity for global threat detection. What you're looking at here, these Chinese characters that are then translated via Google Translate, is a Chinese trade paper that was published that describes a respiratory disease in Wuhan of unknown origin. Now, functionally, what you're seeing here is the result of an AI algorithm that takes in hundreds of thousands of publications in 190 countries in 90+ languages and serves up articles to be reviewed by our team of experts that say, hey, there may be infectious disease activity here. And for example, we will get frequently articles that are flagged that say anthrax is coming to town. And we're of course talking about the heavy metal band Anthrax and not the disease itself. And so we work together with this algorithm to essentially filter out that noise and provide an opportunity for our analysts to provide human judgment. So in this instance, this got our attention very much. Next slide, please. And fundamentally what we delivered was on December 31st, an alert about an undiagnosed respiratory syndrome in China. I think people can sense where I'm going here. But functionally, what we're looking at here again is we had a report that only really we had access to other than the subscribers to this Chinese trade paper. We analyzed this for the infectious disease. We wrote up a risk assessment that was done primarily, again, by our experts. And we sent this out to our partners on December 31st. Next slide, please. This then was put out through multiple channels, including a publication, the first known publication of COVID-19 before it was even reported or even had a name, right? As you can see here in the publication, a pneumonia of unknown etiology in Wuhan, China, submitted on the 8th of January. And what this also did for us, just the final slide, please, is it provided the basis for us to then predict the spread of this disease. And so in that publication, you may have seen a list of cities to the right. Those are the cities that we anticipated would receive this disease next. And we correctly predicted 8 out of the next 10 destinations. Now, this is something we do on an ongoing basis for our partners, municipalities, provinces, states, federal government, and enterprises worldwide to help them essentially continuously monitor for for disease threats worldwide. And what I hope this shows is fundamentally, I think we'd like to think about AI as something that is, in opposition to, or is a threat to, many jobs or many functions or whatever it may be. And I think what Blue Dot is a really good example of is the pairing of AI with human intelligence to provide some breakthrough insight that you would not have received otherwise. And so in our world, we really think about this sort of pairing. And I hope that that sort of context gives you a sense of how these can be applied in terms of assisting human judgment. So thank you. Very excited for this conversation.
Wow, thanks, James. I think that that's definitely something that we're all interested in, and how that goes together. And this is, wow, what a case study to have at your fingertips there to share. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over now to Corio, who will walk us through all the panelist questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mo. And yeah, thanks everyone for your introduction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. I'm just going to quickly go over the rules. So if you have any questions, this is for our audience, please feel free to add it to the chat, and Mo will be monitoring it closely, so that if you have any questions or if you want to address it to a specific panelist, that we can add it to our slate of questions. And to our panelists, I promise this is not an interrogation. This is an open discussion. We have identified some key people who can answer some of the questions, but if you want to put your ideas in, throw your hat at the ring, please feel free to just do that, raise your hand, and then we'd be good with that. Like, not super strict. Like Mo said, it's not really a debate, so. Okay, so questions. So for the first one, this is actually addressed for everyone. So Josephine and Yasmin talked about it earlier with regards to accountability. So how do we ensure accountability across developers, companies, different peoples in the roles of the organization when employing AI for social good? So opening it up to everyone.
I can start here. Or James, look like you're about to start.
The unmuting first. Okay. There's two things that come to mind, maybe just to set the stage. So at Blue Dot, we were founded by a doctor, a medical practitioner, who directly ported over the principle of do no harm into our organization. And so we have a cultural value to avoid unintended or intended bad outcomes for our partners and for society. And that type of principle, that type of cultural bedrock, I think is a pretty key point, because we can now look at individual decisions, of which there are dozens up and down our technology stack, from the prism of do no harm. And that really helps us have a shared language. You often will find in an applied context that you are making occasionally moral judgments on pretty technical decisions. And so just having that baseline principle is really vital. The other thing I would mention too is ensuring your incentive system is fundamentally aligned with your users or your client base or whoever it may be. I think it's simplifying somewhat, but if you look at all the the social ills that are provided by certain services, I would just ask you, is the way they're making money aligned with how their users want to use the platform? And in some case, the answer is aggressively no, and that's often where you're going to find the most famous cases of misuse and antisocial behavior. And so to me, the notion of, at an organizational or initiative level, ensuring that you have a solid principle and ensuring that you have incentive alignment is functionally going to allow you to push down this decision-making to where you're not having to have a referendum or a re-examination of your values at every code level change, because these things do move fast and you do need to make decisions quickly. So I would just open it up with those general thoughts.
Sure, I can hop on next. It's my background pre-working in AI was more in healthcare, and specifically medical diagnostics and medical devices. And I think one thing that's often missed, especially with smaller startups and people get new to the AI field, is process. using healthcare as an example, when you go to submit a medical device or something like that, there is a metric load of paperwork, process, and all that. And I think to successfully deploy algorithms or AI, especially in sensitive areas, you need to apply process. So this is one thing we're looking at HelpSeeker right now. And literally on my whiteboard at my desk, there's a whole privacy framework and like working through all that fun stuff. And process means everyone has a shared understanding of what it means to, let's say, train up the people so they understand AI, have audits with external people to understand what are the privacy impacts, and really enshrine the quality, because it's not that people may not have the best intentions at heart. It's in part about ring fencing it, just making sure we have a shared understanding of what quality, privacy, and just doing good actually means on a day-to-day basis. So it's not all process, don't get me wrong, I hate paperwork, but I think it's an important kind of addendum to what James said, because he laid that out beautifully. But where I've seen it go wrong personally is there's no process to say what is ethical, what is privacy, and how do we deploy that across our organization.
I'd like to continue from Matt's wonderful idea about having process and how do we really understand what is good and what is privacy and all of that. And that's really the problem right now, is many organizations are engaging in ethics washing, because there are more than 100 ethical frameworks out there. Each company can put up their own ethical framework, and they pick and choose which ethical principle they want to apply to themselves so they look good. And it's really good PR to do ethics washing. Another thing is that a lot of organizations also engage in math washing, saying, you know what, algorithms are math and therefore they're objective. And if the algorithm said no, then maybe the answer is no. So to stop companies and nonprofits and governments from engaging in math washing and ethics washing, AI regulations are coming to the fore, because now it is mandated that you have to follow the law in terms of what is really responsible and ethical AI. And the most robust way that governments have decided how AI is going to be used for good and deployed for good is using the international human rights law framework. Because what is fair to you might not be fair to me. In fact, what is fair to males might not be fair to females. What is fair to immigrants might be not fair to non-immigrants. But if we're using the international human rights law, which more than 170 countries have signed up on, we are using the international standard of the right to equality and non-discrimination. So that is actually being extended right now. And so all the laws that are emerging are using privacy and human rights by design. And that's exactly how we are conducting our privacy and algorithmic impact assessments for organization, by using the human rights lens as well as the privacy by design lens.
That's a really good point, Josephine. So then, just as a follow-up, sorry, I'm shaking up our questions a little bit. As a follow-up to that question, Josephine, there are big tech organizations who are essentially like creating their own laws also around what is ethical versus what is not ethical. So how does all these laws from an international standard that are set going to be implemented to these big tech companies who do have like buy-in from like their own governments of like running their own show, so to speak?
Yes, and that's a great question, Kirill, because right now, so the first international law that's coming out is the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. And the EU is saying anybody who deals with an EU national, you don't have to be, you can be in Canada, but if you have any subscriber in your newsletter, he's from Canada, you're subject to the EU Act. So it's going to be like an international framework that all companies and organizations that are using personal information of individuals will have to comply with. So to your question, Kirill, there will be no option. In fact, the penalties are very onerous. It's 4% of global revenues. That's going to be the penalty if you do not comply. Aside from the fact there's going to be global shaming as well, which will harm the reputation of an organization.
No, perfect. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Josephine, and thank you for humoring me for that. So moving on to our next question, to Yasemin. So it's interesting because you're coming at it like you're also like a professor in university. And so a lot of these conversations that are happening are assuming that everyone is already out in the field. They're working developers, working data scientists, working data engineers. So as they're going through school, how do you balance teaching and ensuring that you're teaching them the technical as well as the ethics of what they're going to do and the implications of the work that they're going to be faced with?
So that's really important thing, Carol, that you mentioned, because some of these things that we're talking about, doing the work in an ethical way, that's something that we need to build from the base knowledge in the students. So when they are studying, so I feel that we have that responsibility to be able to teach these and make sure that our students are aware of these ethical issues that may arise. And one thing that I can admit that, I mean, as person working in technology, we usually get fascinated by what tech is doing and sometimes forget about how others are feeling about it. And that's something that is coming up very often in different discussions. And the fact that to teach these subjects, some of these subjects are multidisciplinary and require not just one person from one background to teach students, but also a joint effort to be able to teach in a meaningful way some of these aspects. Of course, any of my colleagues who are teaching students in this area related to technology, related to AI, we try to talk about the social impact, how it can affect society, and to be reliable, or at least to talk about the frameworks, the processes that Matt James mentioned, or the regulations that are required, or the need for continuous monitoring. So we try to teach this, but I believe some of these requires a more joint multidisciplinary effort to be able to be more successful in teaching students.
Very, very good. No, it was very interesting because when I went to school, and this is a disclaimer, I did go to Mount Royal and I did interface with Josephine a lot. So it was interesting how in our education, there are specific classes that we have to take, like the impact of technology on like the environment, and as well as like to us as humans as well, and how it has been rooted in fiction, but now it's like manifesting itself into reality because that's like our basis of it. So now it's like tying it back together and how we can get better at it. So the multidisciplinary approach is like very interesting because I know when we go to university, we're like, I hate that class. Why do I have to take this class? But knowing that you need to have that unique perspective in order to bring it forward is really how you succeed. So thank you, Yasmin. So my next question, Matt, I'm just bringing it back to our topic today of like essentially AI for social good. So why should social service providers care about AI when many of them don't really use anything more complex than just storing information in database? They have poor internet connections, and then for the most part, they don't even have an in-house IT support. So how do we make sure that if we are saying that we should have AI, how do we provide it properly to organizations who may not have the right infrastructure to support it?
Thanks, Creel. So let's put this into two parts. One, I loved what Mo said on being left behind. AI has become such a part of our lives today. We don't even know it. You hop on, social media, YouTube, you hop on Amazon, even just searching the web, you run into AI. So part of it is also, if we don't look at it, if we don't try to understand how it can be best used, it will be used on us without us understanding. I even look at myself, I know the space, I worked in it for a little bit now. I can't tell you how, let's say, YouTube's prioritization algorithm works. And so one part is it's really important for us to use our voices so we don't just we're not just carried along for the ride. Because yes, a lot of these organizations might even just be on pen and paper, but others are on Salesforce, and Salesforce has heavy AI integration in some areas. So it's something that even if today we're not applying it in big swaths of the industry, we have to be aware because we will be caught by surprise. The second part is, even with that simple database, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have AI layered on everything from client management to making those important judgment calls like I mentioned. We can even start to use AI more generally. So things like, I know what HelpSeeker, one thing we looked at previously was, can we predict changes in homelessness, domestic violence, and suicide? So can we get ahead of these trends? And for example, COVID was unprecedented. Can we look ahead and try to understand? So even if you don't have a ton of data, there's a ton of data out there we can be utilizing today. So I'd say the two most important parts is it's so important for us to have a voice, because both James and Josephine brought this up. A lot of people don't have those concepts that we share about that equality, the human rights, the do no harm, even if they do it unintentionally. This happens today. And also, AI can help us today in a lot of different ways. It just may not be on your data specifically, but maybe economic trends, how things are changing, how COVID has affected society.
Well, thank you for that, Matt. Yeah, it's important because I think it's coming up and it's in our environment, as you and Mo have said. So then how do we actually ensure that we're literate on it, but as well as understand the implications of it, and making sure that we educate as early as possible with regards to that means that we can make sure that we are trying to create a more level playing field, so to speak. And so last question, and this is for James before we open it up to the crowd questions, but James, so to create accurate models, you need huge amounts of data sets for other organizations, and they may not necessarily be collected ethically or respectful of a person's privacy. Thus, open data, really, there's a lot of like black market things that are happening underneath that. So is there a way to have a good amount of data for training while ensuring that a person's privacy is kept secure?
Yeah, so coming at this from the applied lens, I'm really grateful I got this question, because in an applied context, the data fundamentally is really what you're going to agonize over. And it's really where the value is as well. I was really struck earlier this week. You had essentially a genuine scientific breakthrough in image recognition that essentially moved the standard of image recognition from 90.4% to 90.8%. And so if that extra 0.4% for you is really what's going to move the needle, then great. But really where we see massive shifts in outcomes is by changing the underlying data. Simply, that's where you're going to spend most of your time in an applied context. And so I think it's actually really important to spend a bit of time just on the trade-off inherent in that question, right? Size of data against accuracy. And so really you need larger data sets if the data you're using is not perfectly well suited to the task that you're asking it to do, or the inherent complexity of the task. So if you just take the example of computers being really good at chess, well, having hundreds of years of game data and a really well-defined outcome, capture the king, and don't have your king be captured, means that you have a really great data set that's really well suited to this task. Where we find a lot of applications requiring huge amounts of data is when the underlying data, whether it's mobility or image data or whatever it may be, is not actually super well suited to the outcome you're looking to drive. And this actually, I think, offers practitioners a real opportunity to really closely scrutinize the data from a number of lenses: accuracy, the consent process involved in that, receiving that data, the way it's been, the PII, personally identifiable information, has been removed. You can look at it from all these different lenses, and it doesn't necessarily invoke the fact that you're going to lose accuracy by definition. Often what I find, I recommend when I'm advising different initiatives, is that you may actually want to simply own the whole pipeline. You may want to create your own data that's optimally suited to the task you're looking to do. You can own the consent process, of which, as mentioned, there are many legal frameworks available to you, and I'll certainly leave it to Josephine to comment on which are worth your time or not, as well as your privacy preserving technologies available to you. You essentially, this binary between accuracy and data size doesn't have to exist, particularly, again, if you're looking to drive a given outcome, whether it's an accurate prediction or not, the suitedness of the data to that prediction is going to be your main driver of value in almost, I shouldn't say in almost all cases, in many cases, in most of the cases in my experience. And so I would just be careful about drawing a key distinction there. The last thing I would say is a lot of bias, a lot of unintended outcomes is also going to come from the quality of your data. And so I think I'm really grateful to the example that got pointed out about bias towards women of color. There's another very famous example of facial recognition being very biased against many individuals, including women of color. And part of the reason there is that the data set that this software was trained on had more images of George W. Bush himself than all women of color combined, because it was trained from news from that period. And so that's an instance where, again, if you're looking to avoid unintended consequences, as I optimistically believe these researchers were, by not scrutinizing and examining their data, they're creating unintended consequences, really bad social ills. And so my recommendation, if you're thinking about this, is not to just think about the models, not just think about the AI, think about the whole pipeline from the start of data, and you're going to find a lot of opportunities to intervene towards a good framework, a good ethical framework.
That's very well said. Just like easy peasy, right? There's like to solve all world problems. But no, it's very extensive what you said, because it is like the idea of like, I know there's a lot of tools out there that you can leverage to make it easier for you, but owning the entire pipeline and overseeing really that would make that easier to essentially manage. And so you can see the gaps ideally at the end of the day really easily. So there was a question actually pointed for Matt, but I'm going to open it up for everyone. So do you have any examples aside from like essentially James' entire company? Do you have any other examples of AI being used to address wicked social issues such as poverty or homelessness, predicting and mitigating issues?
I can take that. It's interesting because the social sector does not have a lot of examples of AI, specifically applied AI. And I dare to say that HelpSeeker is actually one of the few groups portion. There is actually a decent body of research. There's some work being done in the LA region I've run into as well. Honestly, I'd have to go more towards health for good examples, like Blue Dot is a great one. I have a friend who just started working at Page.ai out of New York who does radiology imaging. There's tons there, but even in AI for health, that's been slower than, let's say, AI in banking. So I think it's a time of opportunity as the technology matures, as we learn more on how to deploy it, how to do it right. There's so much opportunity in the social sector to do this and do it in the right fashion. But to date, there hasn't been a ton. And you can take that how you will, but I just think it's a land of opportunity here to do it right, looking at equality, working with people like James, Josephine, and Yazaman to really do this in the right way to truly help people. So maybe pay attention to this all in the next couple of years and we'll see where we land.
Awesome. So I know we are coming up on like 4 minutes left. So I actually want to give space for all our panelists to give us last parting words regarding the topic. Is there anything that you just want to say and address our guests today? Josephine, can I pass it off to you first?
So in terms of deploying, as the webinar title is, algorithms for good, there are two things that your organization can do. Conduct privacy impact assessments using human rights by design. And there was a question about, is it equity or equality? And so depending on the country, every country has their own definition of what the right to equality and non-discrimination looks like. So apply that lens, and also in conducting those privacy impact assessments, do stakeholder consultations. Who are the people who are going to be impacted by your technology, and hear their voices to really understand how they're going to be impacted. And the second one is get AI ethics literate, because it's really important to be able to understand how AI can be used for good and how it can be used for ill. I just wanted to quickly add to what James talked about. So there are three sources of bias in AI. One is what he talked about, bias in data. Second is bias in programmers, and third is bias in models. I just wanted to make a statement about bias in programmers, because right now, 90% of software programmers are white males, and therefore they're incorporating their bias into programming algorithms. Unfortunately, why is that? And that's the reason why Siri has a female voice, is because these males said that let's have submissive women, and so let's use female voices for this digital assistant. So let's be aware of not only making sure our data is diverse, but also the people involved in AI in your team are also diverse.
That's very awesome. And Josephine, from the phrase that I closely relate what you said is like you build for who you are. And so if all the developers are white males, then you're building for white males only. So, okay. Sorry about that. Passing it off to you, James.
Honestly, I would just emphasize, I really appreciate all the perspectives here, and certainly appreciate the perspective around anti-bias within your organization as well. I'm glad that that got noted. Honestly, I would simply say, don't be afraid of this technology, particularly in an applied context. There are certainly ways that this can go wrong. We have many examples of this going wrong. There's no question about that. But fundamentally, what we're just talking about here is a simple mathematical tool. It's not an objective one. I love the term math washing, Josephine. I'm going to steal that. It's a fundamentally subjective tool, but this is not something that is so complex, so impossible to understand, and is so, there's ways you can put this in a supervised context, as we do, to sort of maintain social ills. I know there is a degree of anxiety around this. As a Terminator fan, I understand where this comes from. But this is not a technology to be feared at this time. What is available here is something that we can shape, we can guide, and we can push it forward. But we shouldn't be operating from a standpoint of fear and ignorance.
That's very awesome. Thank you, James. I'm a personal fan of robots, but not of the Terminator kind. So passing it off to you, Yasmin.
Yeah, so I think that there were great points here, and I'll just focus on the point that the use of technology and AI in a responsible way and making it use it in the high quality outcome is not the responsibility just for tech people. So everyone in other spaces, in social spaces, for example, you need to come forward and make this as a joint effort, because otherwise, if you leave tech people like me and us to design and solve every problem, probably we're going to design it from our point of view, and we're not familiar with all the impacts that it can cause in your area. So I think it's really important, super important to have, when starting using AI, to make sure that we have that multidisciplinary team, different perspectives that are put into design and the development of AI.
Awesome. Thank you, Yas and Matt. Putting you on a time crunch.
Okay, I will be quick. So if you would have asked me in my 20s about today, I would have talked about the purity of the math, the science, and all that fun stuff. But there's a trend here I'm really noticing, and I do truly believe in. Yasmin talked about training the people who are doing this and the importance of cross-disciplinary education. Josephine talked about really looking at understanding across the organization and looking at having people help you dig into the bias. James talked about do no harm and how to really look at the data and truly understand within your organization what it means. I talked about judgment. It is technology, but so much relies on the people, and we can't forget that at the end of the day. It's not meant to replace it. It's really meant to be useful, and that involves focusing on the people portion of this. But that's it for me.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I really appreciate that, especially because I feel like my role in this work is to bring that different, diverse perspective to this work within HelpSeeker, both from the human piece, the rights-based piece, the racialized piece, whatever we want to call it. That there's definitely that intersection, and the work that I love that we do at HelpSeeker is that those values really align with what we do in terms of our diversity, in terms of reconciliation. All these pieces do need to intersect together. And so thank you everybody so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time that it takes to present, to prepare, and to be here and to answer questions. As I mentioned in the chat, we will do our best to answer all the questions that you put in the chat and the Q&A, and make sure that they get sent along with recording for you to share with your friends and your family later for all this great information. And just a note, we'll also let you know about the next webinar in that follow-up email as well. Thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Take care.